Welcome to this episode of Lead the Machine podcast, where today's leaders and tomorrow's talk about the human side of AI at work. I'm your host, Kirsten Marr, and really pleased to have today's guest on Lead the Machine, John Hyde, someone who is a promising next generation leader. John has held several roles, including Director of Development at Sage Hospitality, Director of Project Management at Zeppelin Development, People Operations, workplace experience at Brightwheel, and International Supply Chain Logistics Manager at Vinyl Me Please, and finally, Director of Operations at a small print shop. Today, though, John is focused on how leadership needs to adapt in the age of AI, balancing innovation with humanity. In addition to his previous roles, John is a founder, board member, and coach. He's also very active in his church, and he brings a unique perspective on building teams, guiding change, and ensuring technology serves people instead of the other way around. What I've appreciated in getting to know John is how he sees his ability to translate between teams, tools, and mindset, and a purpose of serving as a bridge between the vision and the execution, which, let's be real, the execution is where the stuff gets really messy really fast. And having met him while his daughters were on a school break, he is a great dad and role model for those beautiful girls. So, John, you've grown up in a different cultural and community contexts. What did that teach you about navigating complexity and being a translator across teams, industries, and even belief systems?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Um, to be clear, I grew up a missionary kid overseas, and the way that a sociologist would describe that outlook then would be to call me a third culture kid, meaning I didn't really identify with the culture I was in or my culture of heritage, right? Like I didn't really feel like an American living overseas, or didn't really feel like a German kid either because I was the American kid there. What that's done for me, I think has made me an astute listener and learner of the different things that are influencing culture and language around me, right? Technology being a huge one of those. But I always think of the example of the word development as an example for how translation can be really easy or really complicated. I have worked in the nonprofit space where development means raising funds. I
Mhm.
have worked in real estate development where it literally means building buildings. And I've worked in tech startups where development is often referred to like is referring to coding, right? And I think I bring that up because translation and also knowing when to use which version of which word is the EQ part that a human can bring in the face of all of this technology because AI is not as good as a human at knowing when the person you're talking to needs which definition of which word.
One of the
Sure.
things that you've said is that AI should help us be more human, not less. What does that mean to you?
Sure. That's a great question. I think as somebody who I didn't grow up with a smartphone in my pocket, but I got one right after college. I have been an early adopter of technology for most of my life, but that somewhat ages me if I tell you that I got my smartphone after college. Um, but
It
I've
doesn't age you
always,
as much as I can age you, so you're good. You're good.
um, but I've always been, fascinated by this idea of the way that technology influences culture and the way that culture then can grow from technology. And I often think about like the printing press as being this example of when the Gutenberg printing press was created. it enabled people to have the Bible in their own hands and in their own language, right? And what happened there is that in Europe, you get this flourishing and this growth of all these new versions of Christianity and evangelicalism, and essentially the Protestant Reformation could be tied to technology like the Gutenberg printing press. So similarly, I've looked at, I've done this self-analysis of what does the internet have to say, or like what does the introduction of the internet have to do with the way that culture is evolving? What does social media have to do with it? What does AI have to do with it? And so I constantly sit in this place of asking, where's the line? Where is the line that AI will never be able to cross? Some people, in robotics sci-fi world, you call that the uncanny valley. Like there will always be this little gap between what is artificial versus what we as humans can see as not being quite real. Um, Somewhere in the ability to read one another, hold space for one another, hold relationship with one another, really empathize with one another. Where does technology start and stop? And then what should it then be enabling us to do even better? And so I think, especially, we can go through a list of lots of different examples, but especially leadership is one of those places where technology will have an impact, and ideally in a really great way.
How do you think it can be great?
Yeah. Um, Building on the example of the Gutenberg printing press, one of the big differences between the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Church that existed before it was now individuals had their own ability to connect with Scripture in their own language, and even connect their faith individually to God, right? Whether you're Christian or not, that's kind of where I would say the divergence happens, right, between Protestantism and Catholicism. Similarly, there the internet, social media, and now AI have been democratizing information, essentially making more and more information available to more and more people in faster and faster ways. So if everyone has access to more and more information, all of a sudden that looks like a lot different, that looks like a very different form of leadership that is required than somebody who has to teach you the information. Similarly to Catholic priests who could only teach scripture in Latin, that no longer is the issue. So, what does it look like then to be employed or to employ others or lead others when it's no longer about gatekeeping information and it's no longer about being the fastest at being able to digest information? Instead, I think we have to look at the people around us and we have to look at the systems around us. We have to say, okay, where is my work, my leadership, my participation in this actually going to make this situation better for all of us? And I think that's going to look very differently than than an old school model of saying, like, you need to pay your dues and like do all of X, Y, and Z or spend your time doing X, Y, and Z. Instead, now I get to ask the question of like, how are you as a human, as a leader? I'm looking to all the people that I'm a leader for, and I'm asking them, how are you bringing more than just this machine to the table? Because we all have access to this machine.
So I find it fascinating the shift to challenging that entire notion. Like, why should you pay dues? And I really want to hear you say more about that because I'll tell you from the older generations, we look at it and we're like, why don't you want to pay your dues? You just don't want to work hard. You just don't want this or that. Because I paid mine, you should pay yours.
Sure. Let me come at this from a couple different angles. Um, One, I really like the writing that David Graeber has done. I mean, rest in peace. But he was a double PhD, I believe, in economics and anthropology. And his uh, most famous book, or the book that got him most famous, I think, uh, is called Bullshit Jobs. Pardon my French there. But it starts with this premise of, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, everybody thought that when we optimized machines and factories and all these things, essentially by the year 2000, humans should only have to work like 4 hours. And yet somehow we've magically never gotten anywhere close to that. It's an interesting cultural question that we've been dealing with for over 100 years now. Is this like, wait a minute, technology is supposed to be making my life easier, not just taking up more of my time, and yet it's just taking up more of my time somehow. Now that I can see so much more of the world, now that I can see so many other versions of like what living could look like or what my contribution to this world could look like, and I can watch all the documentaries and I can think about all these things. All of a sudden, I think more than before, my generation is decoupling my identity from my activities at work. Whereas I think older generation, at least from the folks that I know, um, work was harder, more difficult, and you had to identify more as it being a part of your identity in order to be able to make it. So in order to be really successful, you really had to put on the coat of, or this hat or that hat to really stand out in your field. It's a very different thing now when there is technology vying for every square inch of your or attention and for every second of your life. And there's more and more messaging about work is only a piece of your identity. And I think, for better or for worse, there's problems in both viewpoints. I think there's from a Christian perspective, it's not good to put all your identity in your job.
Mhm.
But I also think there's dignity in work, and work should be an outflow of love and who you are.
I think what you guys are pushing on is, hey, it can still be a big part of identity and the reward that you feel and the value you feel like you are contributing. But what if we can do it in a different way where we have more time for other things in life, right?
Mm.
And a broader sense of our own identity so that work doesn't take up 90%, 80%, whatever it is.
The biggest shift there started happening around social media.
Mhm.
Um, my wife is a florist. She owns a couple of flower shops, and she's been doing that for, I don't know, 13, 14 years now. Love it. She's an entrepreneur just like myself. Um, but we often talk about our wedding, which will be 14 years ago, um, in a couple weeks, as would we
Congrats.
do things? Thank you. Would we do things differently now that we're older? Would we have changed
Mhm.
our expectations of like how to host all of our friends and family and all these different things? And what's interesting to think about is that right around when we got married is when Pinterest really started influencing people's decisions about their weddings. So now we had a wedding and we had all Colorado flowers. We're in Colorado. We had all natural flowers, organic flowers, or whatever at our wedding. But now my wife, who lives in this, I would say, post Pinterest, post social media world and still trying to do flowers, she has to deal with brides and that expect you to have any flower they see on the internet available any time of year in Colorado, but also be organic and local. And you just can't break the news to a bride to be that like, hey, hydrangeas don't do that at this time of year. I'm so sorry. Even though Pinterest will start giving you the expectation that you should be able to achieve that. I
Mhm.
use that as an example to start thinking about the ways that more and more things have influenced and put pressure on us to excel in more areas of our life. So not only do I have to be an excellent employee now, but I also need to be great at curating my Instagram feed, and I need to be a great dad, and I need to be a person of faith, and I need to be a good husband, and I need to be really, really well read, and I need to be at all these events. And all this, I think social media has put a lot of pressure on people to pay more attention to more aspects of their life. And so I think that on the transverse side, the good that comes from that is that all that pressure forces you to look at your technology and say, like, how do I optimize? How do I like make this technology make all this stuff easier for me? And simultaneously, that's so much pressure. I don't know if anybody was ever supposed to have that many friends, you know? I don't know if our brains were biologically wired to
Well,
deal with
I
it.
think we've always had all those different roles. But my take on it is we sort of just sucked it up and we just didn't fulfill those roles all the time. So I love the challenge to wait a second, if we say these roles are super important, why aren't we divvying up our time and using technology to allow us to sort of do that? So I love
Mhm.
that conversation. It's a conversation we need to be having. And I mean, I find myself, because I paid my dues, getting a little snarky when I'm like, why don't you want to pay your dues? Because I
Mhm.
paid mine and there's value in paying them and there is value in paying them. But there's a lot of room for negotiation about how it can actually work for everyone. So thank you for sharing that. So on the flip
Sure.
side, we have more information, we have more optionality in our life, we have more tech. There's really good things about that. You kind of mentioned it. There's also the not so good, right, things. I mean,
Mhm.
social media definitely connects more of the world, but no one would argue it also has, you know, exponentially increased anxiety in people. And I mean, I
Yeah.
remember having a bully. I had this one girl who was a bully for me. She was in eighth grade. I think I was in sixth grade, but nobody knew about it. She bullied me, she did these different things, but when I walked into my house I could take the one phone off the hook, and I wouldn't get the calls. And it wasn't like she could post something that everyone would start to pile on.
Mm.
So there's these downsides, right? There's definitely these downsides to the technology. If we go
Mhm.
back to kind of thinking about it at work, what risks do you see when companies automate or interject, new technology without rethinking how people are going to react to it, grow, and continue to feel like they're contributing?
The conversations that we have around like work from home, return to office, work-life balance, like all these, I think they're all, we're still culturally trying to figure out how to do all of these things, right? Now that we have all this new technology, the lines get blurry and to all of a sudden really start being expected to be online all the time and available all the time because now I have Zoom at home and I have my email at home and I have like I people don't call me anymore, but I think it's a really difficult thing to know, hey, I'm being equipped to be able to do my work actually from different places. Like I don't even have to drive to work anymore, technically. Like that feels like an efficiency. And simultaneously on the backside, what I've actually done is I've blurred the line between what is my private space versus what is my home space
Mhm.
versus what is my workspace. Um, I think if we're not thoughtful and careful about those moments when they slip, I think that's when culture really starts to erode in a company. And I would say I'm a big believer in the idea that like clear is kind, that if you are clear with somebody about your expectations for them, that is the kindest way to interact with them. But that's an the work from home thing, I think, is a perfect example of the lines get blurry and then you actually can't be clear about it because you don't know what the expectations on you are, let alone somebody around you and what's fair to expect of them. And then the language gets unclear. And then it no longer is a kind relationship between you and your coworkers.
Yeah, that's
Did I
interesting.
get there?
I mean, I think having some flexibility and having maybe a hybrid where you have a couple days at home and you go into an office it is not a horrible thing. But I think being fully remote when you have the opportunity to be in an office, there's so much that is missed.
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot of young people entering the workforce that have never done anything other than remote don't understand even what they're missing out on. It is the mentorship, the body language in meetings, someone pulling you aside to let you know what actually happened in that meeting and why. It's
Mhm.
going to the kitchen and getting your cup of coffee or glass of water and just running into people that you don't always interact with in a meeting, and understanding what everyone's dealing with, even just seeing who's in meeting rooms and what kind of meetings are happening. It's so informative. Going to lunch together, going to happy hour together, all of those things develop you as a professional. And if you're constantly only at home, you miss out on all of it.
I think my pushback against the work from home thing or the work from anywhere thing or the going too quickly down that road is that I can see from a company's perspective why, not paying rent seems like a good thing. Like you have less overhead, right? Or not having to buy cubicle setups, or like there's so many savings, quote
Mhm.
unquote, from making that work more and more isolated to the
Mhm.
point where you see it. I think the outflow is the gig economy of like Uber drivers and DoorDash drivers
Yeah.
and all these like 1099 employment things where companies have essentially offloaded the responsibility of being an employer to making it all this gig stuff. So now you don't have to provide health insurance. Now you don't have to provide any of these other things. And the pessimistic side of me again says, while I can see a shrewd capitalist wanting to pursue that and minimize their overhead, I believe so much in the growth of individuals as being such a significant part of their time at work that I actually would want to advocate in the other direction and say, no, like I'm thinking about your growth as a human being, as an employer. And so therefore, I think it's actually going to be good for you to hear or see somebody's body language during this call, or, whatever, get the rundown on this thing, or get to know the personality of this person that's sitting near you, because it's going to make you grow. And I think that's there's a trade-off there that's happening that I don't think the younger generation, to your point, is like fully understanding.
And how would they? If you've never experienced it, you don't actually know what you're missing out on. Like there's no,
Mhm.
like how are you supposed to know, right? So anyway, that was a cool conversation. So just to kind of keep on, you talked about
Mhm.
belief systems, and we've talked about your faith a little bit. So what would a more faith-informed or spiritually grounded approach to AI look like in practice from your perspective?
Mm. Couple of things. One, I think there is a reason, even though the books weren't written in that order, that the books of the Bible start with "In the beginning, God created and saw that it was good." And so inherently, my belief is that one of the ways that we reflect God's image and bring forth the kingdom of heaven is by being creative and coming up with new solutions, or coming up with a third way, if you want to use Christianese language or whatever. But I think there's a piece of me that believes in creativity as being a very dignifying characteristic in humans. Okay. The point is art and creativity and prophetic voices and bringing in new things um, cannot be done by a machine. The prophetic voice cannot ever come from a machine. I think AI can create content. Sure, you can tell it like I want, a cat cutting pizza and feeding it to a mouse or whatever, and then it'll spit out an image. But is that art? I don't I don't think so. I think that's content. And so in the same way to previous parts of our conversation, I think it almost puts more and more pressure and more need on people to represent godly characteristics like creativity and prophetic voices in this world, because it's no longer just like simple. Um, but I think that's a good challenge. I think that's what humans have been doing since the beginning of time, since technology has come around, has always been, okay, how does this actually enable me to be more of a godly representative in this world?
That's a great way of looking at it. And to your point, AI is not like suddenly we're the first tech disruption.
Mhm.
Like technology, and you can think of technology in a very broad sense. I really like this book called The Fourth Age by Byron Reese, and he talks about AI being kind of the fourth age, and the first stage though was fire, and
Mm,
fire being a technology. And
mhm,
while we might think, oh, it helped people stay warm or stave off predators, what he talked about was, well, it allowed us to cook our food because before that, eating raw vegetables and raw meat took all of our energy as a human, and we
mm,
really did not have much energy for anything else.
mhm,
And so, because it's hard to digest. Um, when you could cook the vegetables and cook the meat, what it did was that our brain grew and we
mhm,
developed the capability of ideation and creativity.
mhm, mm,
And that led to, the writing in the wheel and then agriculture in cities. And then he's saying AI is really kind of the fourth age where
mm.
it's so, transformative. But you have to kind of look at technology who thought of fire as technology? But of course it is. Of course it was.
Yep.
It's
Sure.
tech. We've been doing
Yeah.
tech.
I was reading a book about how air conditioning changed our culture. And 1902 is the first time we had air conditioning, right? Or I think about the books I've read on how much fear there was around the camera making artists' jobs disappear. Like what are we going to do with painters if we can just take pictures of everything? And in reality, at the other end of that, like Georgia O'Keeffe became even more important after the camera came out than she was before.
Mhm.
And so I think I'm definitely a believer in this idea of us having always been creatures that play with technology and are always constantly adapting to those things.
So if we dive in a little bit more on the leadership, so you've lived in these director roles, you are an emerging leader, and you're going to continue to do great things. One of the things that you shared with me, and you talked about maybe leadership gets to a point where it's more about enabling people, and you've talked a little bit about that, not quote controlling them like a traditional
Hmm.
maybe boss, giving orders
Hmm.
as the new standard for leadership. What does that look like to you in action?
All of a sudden, I think, going back to these idea of like democratizing, I think leadership can't look like the one person on the front of the stage. It's no longer like one person that everyone looks up to, but rather it's somebody who people actively want to follow. And I think the people that want you want to follow are the people that help you grow. I think we're a little bit selfish in that in our own nature, right? And so the fundamental question is like with church again, because of my Christian context, like is the important part of a church service the 40 minutes that that guy is standing on stage? Because I guarantee every person in the sanctuary has an access to a better sermon on that same topic in their pocket. Okay, okay, if it's no longer about that one person up on stage, then what is it about? What is our time and our energy about? And what does that look like to lead from a grassroots level that says, let's look left and right rather than up at some leader?
What frustrates you most about how executives or managers can sometimes default to outdated tools or outdated thinking, the lowest common denominator?
Well, we've always done it that way. It's going the way of the buffalo to think like that, right? Um, I I'm thinking back to a point in time when I built a screen printing shop with a friend of mine, and we had a team of like 15 employees, scrappy manufacturing business here in Denver. And I would say that's where I got the sweat equity version of an MBA, if you will, is
Mhm.
growing a company from like two people to 18, right? But I consistently think back on this moment where I had a good friend of mine as a press operator, and he could see another good friend of mine who was on the sales team. He could see her computer, and he could see how much of the day she had Facebook open on her computer. And the amount of times that I had to have a conversation with these with this press operator about how your jobs are fundamentally different. You can't judge it side by side. Um, like it was nauseating. Like just week after week, yeah, I'd get pulled aside and like, hey man, like I don't think this is fair. And that's fine. But what really changed the dynamic for me was when I started thinking about it as going, hey Kevin, like if you're doing this job, what tools are you building in your toolkit right now? When you walk away from being my employee, I want you to have a toolkit to do your next job even better. What tools are you building for yourself? What things are you learning right now in your job? Because those things are going to be different from what this young woman in the office is learning and what tools she's building. They're pushing you in different directions. You don't want the same job that she has. Therefore, let's reorient how we're thinking about what we're doing and how we're comparing ourselves to one another, and think about work really as being this opportunity to like add tools to your toolkit. It fundamentally changed the conversation for our whole company, and all of a sudden you started seeing people really value the differences in their jobs
Mm.
rather than trying to put the pressure of all of the fun parts of their jobs on one another. I don't know. I think of that as a very tangible example of how do you change leadership language? Whereas before, maybe I would have just gone, "Hey man, stay in your lane." That's like old school leadership, right? Um,
So inquirer minds want to know, did you speak to her about the Facebook usage on her?
oh yeah, of course. But she was also in a sales role, and so half of her job was managing our Facebook page anyway.
So there could be a reason.
But
So if you were giving someone advice that's, let's say, in their, late 20s, 30s, even early 40s, about how to navigate your career in the age of AI.
if I can create a framework for myself, if I can start thinking about where that line is that technology will never cross over, that gives me a really clear North Star about what I think humans and leadership need to be on that other side of that line. Um, and then you get to ask the question of like, what parts of that are am I excited about? Which parts am I motivated by? But spending time thinking about what you fundamentally do not believe technology will be able to replace is a
Mhm.
really great starting point in terms of reorienting how you spend your time and viewing AI as a tool and not like a replacement, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I think.
That's really good. Well, it's been so wonderful to spend this time having this conversation. And for everyone listening in, share your thoughts about the conversation, what you wish you had from today's leaders that you think could make you more productive, and evolve the idea of work and workplace, and how we, separate our different parts of our lives and bring value, and still deliver what we need to deliver in terms of company value. And any of us who have jobs, our job is absolutely to lead our companies to success. But there's lots of ways that that can happen. And John, I'm going to be really looking forward to following you in your career as you continue to develop. And you're in leadership today, but you're only going to accelerate
Mm.
your leadership and your impact. So thank you so much for the conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for your time as well. I
Yeah,
enjoyed it.
great.